Welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to the Scary Stuff from Family Friendly Games series. I'm Gegege Gaming, and today we have some more interesting entries to go through. And I've seen the comments, okay? Some people feel like these aren't that scary, and some of them pretty fucking weak sauce, alright? You know, that's fair, but I'd like to remind people to try and put themselves in the shoes that I try to always present in the explanations of the entries. Like, just imagine you're playing this when you were an innocent kid taking in the world at face value and not mentally dissecting everything you see on a screen. I have tried to screen the entries for today's episodes to be more visually creepy and less technically creepy, but we're also delving into the disturbing, the unnatural, and even kink shaming. What the f? If any of that or more sounds interesting to you, then stick around and check out the past episodes for even more content of this nature. Also, I would like to invite anyone who has a suggestion for an entry that fits the theme of being creepy or disturbing from specifically family-friendly games to go ahead and leave them down in the comments down below for a chance to be featured in a future episode. With that out of the way, let's hop into today's entries. You guys supplied me with some real heat today, so let's hop in. Andross from the Starfox series is an entry suggestion I've seen for a while, and I haven't gotten to him until now because I wanted to give him his due diligence, because there's a lot here. Genuinely, this has got to be some of the deepest and best lore for a main villain for a first-party Nintendo game, at least on the N64. Give me that, alright? We were dealing with zero explanation Bulbous Bowser over here for Mario 64, so this stands out. Andross has the typical diabolical scientist backstory you might come to expect from a game like this. He's a monkey character who was working on bioweapons, which ended up getting out of control before he was banished from the Lilat system after one of his experiments blew up a large portion of Corneria City. After being exiled to a planet known as Venom, instead of wallowing in self-pity, Andross continued to go deeper into his bioweapon research until eventually turning planet Venom itself into his own fortress of sorts. Here he started to build up an army and exposed himself to his own experiments, severely disfiguring himself from what he once was. After around half a decade after his banishment, those in Corneria started to notice bioweapon activity coming from planet Venom, causing them to send a recon team made up of James McCloud, the father of Fox McCloud, Peppy Hare, and Pigma Dingar. What a name, dude. You feel badass just saying that. Upon approaching the planet, it's revealed that Pigma was secretly on Andross's payroll and led them straight into an ambush. Only Peppy was able to escape, returning to Corneria to deliver the devastating news of the presumed death of James McCloud. And with an already heavy backstory like that, the boss battles had to reflect this, and for the most part they do. Andross shows up in most every Starfox game there is, but perhaps his creepiest form is in Starfox 64. Here he takes on the look he has nowadays, which is a giant disembodied monkey head with two large, like, gloved hands. Are they gloved? This phase of the boss alone would be enough to put some players on edge, as this form of him and this lighting on the N64, it all culminates in the just something feeling off about this whole scene here. Not to mention the thrilling but equally terrifying music playing in the background makes a spectacle of a final boss. Upon finishing the battle, it seems like Andross is stopped for good as he starts to freak out before the literal skin on his face starts to come off slowly before revealing Andross's final form. In this form, he has stripped any identifying piece of him left and is now just a floating brain and eyes. The brain's veins or stems or whatever this junk is hanging underneath almost made him look like a giant jellyfish to me. I don't like that. You guys know how I feel about jellyfish. If the shocking reveal of this second phase of the boss wasn't enough, of course, now you have to fight the monstrosity. The battle is now unlocked so you can freely fly around, meaning you'll have to relocate the brain to take it down. And I don't know, man, any time at all with this guy being behind me is too long. He could Professor X your shit down without you even knowing. You gotta get that guy in LOS, line of sight, immediately. The second phase of the boss fight isn't as tough and can be taken down with relative ease. That is until Andross sacrifices himself in order to attempt to kill Fox. I know this is supposed to be an intense moment, but this clip of Fox screaming will never fail to make me laugh. It's so perfect.
If I go down, I'm taking you with me.
It seems Andross was stopped then, but he still shows up in future Star Fox games, albeit not as intense as in Star Fox 64. I'd love to see this guy come back in a meaningful way in one of the future Star Fox games, and really let the developers expand on this already deep backstory, because he's such an intriguing villain to me. For now though, everybody can rest easy knowing the big monkey brain science man is defeated. Now, I know I just went into great detail about what I consider to be one of the best examples of a boss with extended deep lore that Nintendo had to offer, but what if we swing the pendulum over to Sega's side? It seems like they were taking their villain backstories and lore just as seriously as old Nintendo. Everyone is familiar with Sonic's nemesis, Dr. Robotnik, aka Dr. Eggman. However, many may not be as familiar with his backstory and thus his lineage. The Robotnik name started to gain traction with Dr. Eggman's grandfather, Professor Gerald Robotnik, who was a well-regarded scientist who spent his early years providing valuable scientific research for the benefit of humankind, and was even recruited by the president to develop something known as the Ultimate Life Form, in which the government intended to dissect the thing for the immortality formula the life form possessed. You know, typical government shit. At first, Gerald was hesitant, saying that there are certain boundaries that must not be crossed, but after learning that his granddaughter Maria was terminally ill, he decided it might benefit his situation to take up this research on the ultimate life form after all. Fast forward some time after this, and Gerald has not made any ground in his research, but comes across an entity known as Black Doom, who is an alien space leader over a group known as the Black Arms. Through this introduction, Gerald arranges an agreement with the Black Doom to assist him in his research of the ultimate life form, and in return, Gerald's creation will have to gather all the Chaos Emeralds for the Black Doom for an unknown reason. With this and a little bit of Black Doom's blood, Gerald was able to finally create his ultimate life form, and it turns out to be a pretty infamous Sonic character called Shadow the Hedgehog. After this, the professor learned the true intention of the Black Doom using the Chaos Emeralds would be to drain Earth's inhabitants of their power. Realizing this and his mistake, he began developing something known as the Eclipse Cannon to fight against the Black Comet, but before being able to make any leadway on that, the government moved in on Gerald, fearing his experiments have become too dangerous to be left alone. I mean, he did kinda succeed in creating the ultimate life form, and it's kinda just hanging out with him too. Of course, the government is gonna try to intervene. The government is eventually able to capture Gerald Robotnik, and after a while of being in prison, he was forced to continue his research until one day he ended up learning about the demise of his granddaughter Maria. This happened upon the gun units infiltrating and gunning down anyone inside the Ark, including Maria, and Gerald was already shipped away at that point. After learning of this, Gerald fell into a pretty intense mental spiral with the sole goal to exact revenge on everyone and everything. He started to scribble calculations on his cell walls that would end up using his Eclipse Cannon and the power of the Chaos Emeralds to destroy Earth itself. Fearing the worst, the government decided it was best to go ahead and get rid of old Gerald, execute him before he was able to pull off anything that devastating.
End once all the 7 Chaos Emeralds are collected. Once I initiate this program, it cannot be disabled. All of you ungrateful humans who took everything away from me will feel my loss and despair.
You know, if you walked up to me, guy on the street model, and you asked me, did anybody ever get executed in a Sonic game? I'd probably say no. And while they technically don't show it here, they all but do show it. And if you had to guess which method of execution Gerald would have faced, surely something a little bit tamer than firing squad came to mind? Well, this is exactly what Gerald's fate was. But right before the execution was carried out, he was able to make one final video recording wherein he states his distaste for those who wronged him and his plans for taking revenge on them. They at least let the guy finish his thoughts and even asked him if there was anything else he wanted to say, in which Gerald coldly says no. Before the next moment, the screen turns red, and we can hear a soldier yell, "Ready!" and the tape cuts before the execution is carried out.
Is there anything else you want to say?
No.
Ready!
What's going on here? Who is that?
Pretty disturbing stuff, you know, that and sad, as we can see the last bits of humanity Gerald has seep out of him in this final statement. And to say it's powerful would be an understatement. Listen, I know we're talking about Sonic right now, I really do get that, but for this to just casually be the backstory to this world-ending event is actually pretty wild. This video serves to add some context to the story of Sonic Adventure 2 when the gang runs across this video, and Amy sounds as confused as I would be if I ran into an older version of Robotnik getting domed on camera. What kind of snuff film room did I just walk into? Who's operating this thing? With the added context of Gerald Robotnik's life and tragedies, it adds even more devastation to this video being shown. Thanks for the recommendation, and I can definitely see how this would have done something to a decade-old kid at the time, seeing a member of Robotnik's family get just fucking riddled with bullets. God damn. Splatoon is a pretty regular segment in this series, so much so viewers have asked that I cover the Splatoon lore as a whole, since it is so dark. I'd like to say I think it's a great video idea, but since I only ever played the first Splatoon, I need to go back and experience all of the Splatoon games first, so that video is a ways out. But for today, let's talk about a pretty terrifying sound effect you can hear in the first two Splatoon games. This creepy sound effect happens before or after completing a boss battle in the single player mode, and you'll just have to kind of sit there to hear the ambient sound effects of the boss room. At first, it seems to just be eerie mechanical ambience, but they are quickly followed by disturbing screams, and thus the theories began to run rampant with theories of where the screams were coming from. It became so famous that Splatoon director Tsubasa Sakaguchi even spoke on the sounds, saying that he was even unaware of how the sounds got there, stating in an interview with Eurogamer, "It's the first time I've heard of this. I was the one who was in charge of mechanics and the effects for the final boss. Towards the end, though, I was running out of time, so I was asking the staff around me to do things for me, like the staff credits and many other things. Maybe it's a curse from those other staff. The final boss was one of the last things that we were working on. We were all high on adrenaline. Maybe there's some element of that in there, of that energy in there. Once I go back to Japan, I'll play it and have a look. He was never heard from again." Nah, I added that last part. He's fine. So if you do take the director at his word, then this was likely snuck in by staff that went unnoticed by higher-ups. Regardless, the sounds are here and they're creepy as hell. So what the hell are they? Well, players wouldn't get a shred of evidence until the release of Splatoon 2, in which the sounds returned in the same fashion as Splatoon 1. While this simply brought the screams back and added even more mysteries to the sounds, because why the hell are they returning, it was the Octo expansion DLC where the real answer would lie. If you played the expansion, then you know it takes place well below Inkopolis in the Metro. You play as Agent 8 along with Captain Cuttlefish. He's a straight fucking G, I don't care what you say about him. As you go through a series of tests to collect things that will take you to the Promised Land. Turns out the Promised Land is being grinded up into a juice that will end up turning your genes into fuel for biological weapons. Yeah, I can see why you guys want me to run through the lore now. With this discovery made during the Octo expansion, players put 2 and 2 together and matched the sounds of trains from the original boss room sound clip and assumed that the sounds were coming from the deeper underground in the Metro that the Octo expansion takes place in. It's all starting to connect. Of course, that doesn't explain the terrifying screams we can also hear, or does it? If we take a look back at the beginning of the Octo expansion, you are deemed the 10,008th test subject, which is shortened to Agent 8, but considering there was over 10,000 that came before you, surely quite a large percentage of them met the terrible Blender fate. And thus, this is what theorists have deemed the most likely answer for the screams. Listen, it checks out with me, and since there isn't and likely won't be an explanation from the developers on this, I think it's safe to say the screams we hear in the boss room are of those Octolings who are getting ground up into straight goop. Again, I am planning on doing a video diving deeper into Splatoon's lore, especially that of the Octo expansion, but as I stated, I need to not only dedicate myself to purchasing both 2 and 3, but to also invest the time into playing them. So this video will be a ways off. I'm not sure how long, but just to address those who've been interested in me tackling the series as a whole, that video will be out in the future at some point. I think it's a great video idea. Thanks for the suggestions on that one. The Starfy series and the term underrated have been wed almost in internet culture, but it's true, the game is a criminally underrated platformer series that has been laying in the wake with one of the coldest, baddest main characters ever. This guy, Starfy. You don't want to fuck with him. Yeah, man, he lets the regs get all the limelight while we only hear from Starfy every half a decade, and every time we do, he brings some fucking heat. For the longest time, until literally last month of this year, 2024, the only Starfy game available worldwide was the legendary Starfy on Nintendo DS, but Starfy had quite a few adventures on the Game Boy Advance in the early 2000s, which were local only to Japan. That was until last month in July, when the first 3 Starfy games are now available on the Game Boy Advance Nintendo Switch Online app. So that's pretty cool. This game was brought up a few times, and the main sequence that was brought up by the comments was the snarky shark from the SS log water level. This larger-than-life shark creeps up on the player in the background, which is fully rendered in 3D, while the front of the level and Starfy is 2D, and it ends up looking really fucking cool. Too bad this big-ass pink shark has to ruin the moment. While you are swimming through the open ocean parts of the level, the shark in the background can charge Starfy at any point and try and eat him, causing the player to have to seek cover whenever they see the shark start to hone in on Starfy from the background. This is ass-clenching enough, but when they added in a super crunchy, bit-it-out sound effect warning for the shark charging, and it definitely adds to the urgency of trying to hide from this gargantuan shark. If he does happen to catch you, the shark will swallow Starfy whole and send him straight down to his digestion tract, which the player ends up getting to play out in a sequence. This isn't my first experience running into something like this, and my weirded out alarms haven't started ringing yet. I'll say yet. The only way out and the whole point of getting swallowed in the first place is to exit by unlocking the secret area to secret exit. Think of a Boo house in Mario. You take the alternate path out. That is through the shark's tract. The way to do this is by attacking the shark's digestive fat glands, I guess you could call them. I don't know, I'm no doctor, but you basically have to keep looking for the bilge monkeys who keeps getting slurped up by the shark's intestines. After rescuing them, they'll unlock the area on the map and you get transported back to the world map. So overall, it's not the worst thing to get ate up by the shark, but man, this doesn't stop it from being an intense ass segment of the game. It reminds me of the wave level from Donkey Kong Country Returns, if anybody's familiar with that, but this is on a whole other level of paranoia because it's a big ass pink shark versus some salty water. I mean, both don't sound that pleasant, but I know which one I'd rather take. Another part of the legendary Starfy recommendations came from this comment, which stated that the main villain Mashtooth used to creep them out when they played the game back in the day, and that his boss battle even included Vor. I never knew I'd be breaking down a fetish like this in one of my videos, but leave it to Starfy to bring out the strangest in video games. You can't stay mad at this guy though, look at him. Vor, or in its long form, vorophilia, is the fetish involving being eaten or eating something or someone. That's the official definition, and I know what I thought when I first heard of Vor. Oh, it's just a bunch of horned up cannibals. The cannibals are wilded now. But in reality, the practice of Vor began in early internet culture and has grown to the strange fetish it has in current day since. Listen, I never want to fetish shame, but I think it's safe to say keep it out of the video games unless it's specifically a game focused around that subject, especially if the game is clearly being marketed towards kids. The specific scene in question happens near the end of the game where after defeating the boss Mashtooth, he will end up snorting up your friend Bunston in order to consume his power as a last-ditch effort to defeat Starfy. After snorting Bunston up, he then consumes him, which we see in a pretty epic detail, before showing Mashtooth's belly growing and him consuming the power before being launched out to the final boss scene with a swift gut punch from Starfy, where you end up fighting a souped-up version of Mashtooth. I mean, he's so powerful, he's changing dimensions. Bro was 2D 3 seconds ago. This wasn't the only example of this strange snorting move Mashtooth has either, as during the initial boss fight, he'll use this as an attack that is super devastating if you get captured by it. When he sucks you in, you'll need to mash the F out of the control pad to free Starfy, but if you don't succeed, Mashtooth will swallow Starfy whole through his nasal passage and spells an instant game over for the player, no matter how many hearts you still had left. Listen, sure, besides the snarky shark, I don't know if I'd say this entry is that creepy, but disturbing also covers a large variety of emotions, and weirded out is definitely one, and I'm feeling that after witnessing this segment. Thanks for bringing this one up to my attention, not only for the strange vibes, but for the terrifying shark sequence from SS Logwater. I honestly don't know which one's worse. Which would I rather run into more regularly? Never mind, that's a pretty easy decision. Get me far away from this fucking guy. If you're unfamiliar, Gegege No Kitaro is a manga series that started in Japan in the 60s and was responsible for modernizing the folklore creatures known as yokai at the time. Nowadays, yokai are used more often in the media, and rightly so. They're terrifying creatures, and as I've stated on the last video in the series, a few really creep me out. They really get me. Gegege No Kitaro started out as a dark manga that ended up being too dark for kids who read it, causing a rebrand to Gegege No Kitaro in 1965, where they took on a lighter tone for the mangas. The modern design of the main character, Kitarō, versus the initial iteration may go to prove why this change was necessary, but since then the series has been known to represent the yokais still in a creepy light, but a much more light-hearted setting. Gegege No Kitaro spawned many games starting all the way back in 1985 on the X1, followed by several Famicom and Super Famicom releases. Today, the one in question is when Konami got their hands on developing the series in the early 2000s, specifically the Gegege No Kitaro Gyakushu, which is the one this comment was recommending, and the fact that I think it also looks to be one of the most refined of these games. The game was released exclusively in Japan on the PlayStation 1 and was one of the last PS1 games released on the system in Japan. The game takes the most terrifying of the popular yokai creatures and throws an ass ton of them in as bosses and enemies in a platformer game, and I thought Mario was pretty out there when I first played it. On the real, this game reminds me of a Japanese Joe and Mac game, but instead of dinosaurs you're fighting, there is a creepy ass yokai, which is so much more terrifying than dinosaurs. The game has a lot that could be considered creepy, and I could never do it justice without making the rest of the video about this game, so I wanted to highlight a few of the more disturbing bosses in the game. I want to start with the Gashadokoro, which was the boss that the comment recommending the game stated was particularly creepy. This was also one of the yokais I mentioned had particularly creepy me out due to the megalophobia I have, especially with giant skeletons like this guy right here. The Gashadokoro appears in a boss level to a world in a large field during dusk. Your objective is to continually run from the giant skeleton whilst also taking time to attack it, which you can do in between the creature's large strides. This fight and flight combination makes for a pretty intense boss battle, and one that sticks out to me to just be straight up bone chilling. And I'm undecided if I meant that as a pun or not, but I'll get back to you. The next boss I wanted to point out is one of the earliest creatures you see in the game, but you won't be able to fight it until after the Gashadokoro boss fight. It is a large kappa-like disembodied head that acts as a large heavy object like a stone or something, which it uses to crush people. Not only this, but during his boss battle you also go against two other yokai characters who start out the fight, known as Futakuchi Onna and Kamatachi, with Futakushi being particularly creepy with a large mouth taking up the back of her head, making for a somehow more terrifying version of Voldemort's head on the back of his head. This design is because of what this yokai is actually based off of, the yokai by the same name, which is described as having a mouth start at the skull of the woman at the back of her head, and apparently often whispers threats and demands food from the woman. A really creepy concept here, and to see it in this game, even in a much more tame form, is still creepy to see. The last boss I want to highlight here seems to me to be an original creation for the Gegege No Kitaro universe, but if someone has any knowledge of a real mythological yokai you could tie this thing to, let us know in the comments. The Backbeard is the final boss of the game and immediately appears after you defeat the Dracula boss, and the player is immediately met with a maniacal laugh from the looming eyeballs shrouded in darkness. After that, you fight across a large bridge with a bunch of enemies before reaching the end and getting help by a magical flying toilet paper roll to go take down Blackbeard. That's the best way I can describe this. After acquiring the TP, you can finally get on the giant eyes level and finally take it down. It reminds me of your typical Eldritch Horror Kirby final boss battle where you're flying around shooting shit at insane speeds. But I do have to say, the design of this thing really went all out, making the eye semi-realistic with pure darkness surrounding it that checks all of the boxes of being off-putting to me. But I might just be afraid of eyes, I don't really know. These games aren't as tough to play now as in back in the day thanks to emulation, so I do recommend those who are interested to go back and check these games out, as I probably will after this. And it helps that there is a lot of games from the Gegege series dating all the way up to the Wii and DS eras, so I'll definitely be dipping my toes into the series coming up, and I'll report back if I find anything else as disturbing as this surreal PS1 game. Thanks again for the recommendation. By far, one of the most common entry suggestions I've seen for the series over the course of a lot of videos was for me to talk about a little game known as Rugrats Search for Reptar on the PlayStation 1. The game is pretty infamous at this point for basically being a horror game in sheep's clothing, that clothing being a friendly kids game about Rugrats. I mean, you're literally playing as infants, so nobody expected this to be traumatizing when they played the game back in the day. There is a lot of the game that stands out as just plain unnerving, but I wanted to pull specific moments, more specifically moments that viewers had suggested in the comments, so thanks to all who suggested Search for Reptar, let's hop into what made this strange, seemingly innocent kids game so creepy. Perhaps the most infamous and the one thing that might strike fear into anyone who had forgot they played the game is known as Mr. Friend. You run into Mr. Friend when entering the Pickles' home basement and entering the level known as the Mysterious Mr. Friend. Little on the nose, that's fine. Here you have to evade and defeat the strange small clown robots who move very quickly and speak in broken robot dialogue.
I am Don't Be Blue. I will sing a song for you.
The worst part about this level is the fact that they spawn a whole lot of Mr. Friends, so you have to manage avoiding all of them while slowly dishing out attacks. But the way the game controls, which I'll just say is equivalent to spilling maple syrup on an old PS1 controller and sticking it in the freezer overnight, maybe it's not that bad, but it's definitely a PS1 game, I'll say that. All of that makes for a real ass clincher of a level and one that stuck with most players who played the game back in the day. Ironic, Mr. Friend was never a friend after all. The next level that was too much for the literal children playing this game was the Toy Emporium, where you sneak off from Tommy's dad as Chucky and Tommy and end up running into a giant purple gorilla. And no, I know what you're thinking, he's not going to give you some malware or something. Instead, this guy just patrols the area like some sort of Dead by Daylight or Outlast Trials monster or something waiting to strike. It doesn't help your objective here is to gather Reptar toy boxes in order to reach the switch to turn Reptar's animatronic on to put the gorilla away once and for all. So you have to make several treks around the ape to complete the objective. This is where I'd like to point out something with this game. It's not so much what you're seeing in the game visually, it's more what you're doing that makes it creepy. The game has a bunch of game mechanics you'd expect to see in modern horror games, like the, you gotta go get a bunch of this thing, but you can only carry one at once, you know, that shit. So to see this in a game like this was so unexpected, it made it even more creepy to witness. Experiencing this type of gameplay for the first time in a Rugrats game. Imagine that. Talk about a fucking whiplash. But I bet even if I played this level now, the feeling of being chased would still do a little something to me, at least in this level. I don't know, there's something about purple gorillas, I just don't trust them, you know what I'm saying? Lastly, I want to bring up the Let There Be Light level where you play as Tommy, who wakes up in the middle of the night in his crib to a quiet, pitch black house. He ponders on how to get the light back, and in his infant mind thinks that he needs to get the light back out of the fridge since it always has light when you open it, and thus your objective is to scour Tommy's pitch black house with only a flashlight, making your way to the fridge. Yo, I play this fucking mission every night at 2 a.m., man. What the hell? This isn't creepy. Okay, except I don't have ghost haunting my house, which is a real problem here at Tommy Pickles' abode. Apparently, as almost in every room and around every corridor, you might find a ghost lurking. They aren't the creepiest things ever, and they can be dissolved with the flashlight, but again, it isn't what's being presented, it's how it's being presented, especially gameplay-wise. The last thing I'd expect to do in a Rugrats game is urban explore a pitch-black version of Tommy Pickles' house and run into actual paranormal activity along the way, but here we are with Search for Reptar. This is a crazy-ass game. I really like covering at least one of these classic kids games in each video in the series and diving into what made them unnecessarily creepy, and this was a great entry. So thanks to all of those who suggested it, and let me know if there's any other licensed kids games that were creepy that had no real reason to be. Pikmin 3 is a really stellar Pikmin entry, not that there has been a particularly bad one. Okay, not a particularly bad mainline game, but 3 is really f***ing good. It reintroduced the Pikmin formula to veterans of the franchise while also introducing its unique gameplay concepts to new players since, you know, it had been 9 years since Pikmin 2 came out. The game is great throughout, seeing a team of 3 aboard the SS Drake searching for food to return to their famine-stricken planet. But upon approaching PNF 404, the SS Drake hiccups and crash lands, causing each crew member to be separated from one another. After discovering your crew members, you also discover the only way to make it off the planet is with the Cosmic Drive Key, which Pikmin alumni Olimar just so happened to take, thinking it was treasure after he also crash landed. So not only are you tasked with collecting food, but you also need to find Olimar, which honestly is becoming a worrying amount of times rescuing this guy at this point, but nonetheless with this game, the game ends with you needing to save Olimar from the Formidable Oak. The Formidable Oak is the last area in the game and is strangely abandoned when the crew first gets there. Unlike all the other areas in the game filled with enemies and other collectibles, the Formidable Oak is uncomfortably barren. From here you find Olimar's unconscious body in the center of the tree with a large gooey golden figure standing over him. This thing is known as the Plasm Wraith, and much like the Water Wraith from Pikmin 2 we've talked about in the past, the Plasm Wraith is very destructive and devastating for the Pikmin crew. This thing's gonna get quite a few of you guys. Start sending letters home. This may not seem like the case at first, as the first battle with the Plasm Wraith ends without much trouble, but issues arise when you try to carry Olimar out. It gets worse when you realize the only way out is to go through the Formidable Oak, aka this thing's home. It doesn't take long for the Plasm Wraith to make itself known again by dropping down behind you as you walk into the tree, and it's immediately time to hightail it out. There is a large cave-like level that you will have to venture through in a day's time if you're efficient enough, because as if the scenario wasn't bad enough, you still have to worry about the time limit. Come on, Miyamoto. Come on, dude. I haven't talked about you in a fucking video like this in forever, dude, but you did this, and I'm coming for you, alright? The music during this section is super intense, as it's this creepy ambient track that ramps up to bombastic anytime you lose Olimar to the Plasm Wraith. On top of all that, you can start finding some pretty grim captain's logs from Olimar littered around the Formidable Oak before he became fully succumbed to the Wraith. A lot of these detail how he slowly loses Pikmin and he's unable to retrieve more here, adding even more to the fact that this area has been fully decimated by the Wraith, making it the only thing that lives here now. You may have seen some enemies on your way out of the tree, but if you pay attention, you can see them turn into the same gold goo the Wraith is made up of when you defeat them, meaning these are mimics and creations of the Wraith. After escaping from the trial of sorts, you're expected to fight the Wraith one last time in a pretty simple boss battle before saving Olimar for the final time. As the gang jets off, we could still see the Plasm Wraith chilling now in full form again at the top of the tree, seeing the gang off. It almost looks like he's waving at them and cementing the fact that this thing may never actually die, and they just so happen to get enough time away from the beast to make it out with their lives. It's a really stressful survival situation of a final boss battle, and it makes it one of the best in the series. There is a theory online that has the potential to make this guy even more creepy. Many believe this form of the Wraith to be the same as the Water Wraith from Pikmin 2 and has been around since Olimar's initial crash in Pikmin 1. I bet you didn't think I'd tie yokais back into this video, but you'd be wrong. I'm the yokai guy. Many believe this creature to be a form of the yokai known as the Umabozu, who is known to sink ships at sea. This would be a tiny bit of a stretch since we're dealing with spaceships, but I guess it's still the same idea as a ship at the end of the day. The reason some believe that this entity may be the same creature throughout the whole series, specifically the Water Wraith to the Plasm Wraith, is because the Hokitate ship lost its gold coloring, meaning the Water Wraith ingested the coloring, giving its gold color during its Plasm Wraith form. If this theory is to be believed, then this means this thing is constantly crashing ships and torturing the captains of the ship for unknown reasons still. Perhaps there is more to this than we've been shown yet in the Pikmin series, and I'm really starting to agree with this comment I saw that states, I'm starting to get the feeling that Wraiths are going to become the Pikmin equivalent of Kirby's Dark Matter bosses. Whatever Nintendo plans to do with the storyline in the Pikmin series next, I'm all here for it. And if it is true that this theory is correct, then the Pikmin series just got a whole lot darker than we ever expected. Move aside, Smokey Prog, you're light work, son. That'll do it for today's video. Up top at the intro here, I want to apologize to those who've been commenting their suggestions for a while now. I have seen almost all of these suggestions, and I do plan to get to most of them in due time. I'm trying to give each entry their due spotlight, so they're taking a bit longer to tackle than I first expected. But just know, those who've been commenting your suggestions multiple times, I assure you one day I will get through all of the backlogged entries. With that said, I am still accepting more entries, so if you have anything you'd like me to cover in a future episode, let me know down below. And don't feel any pressure to re-comment a past suggestion. As I've stated in the past, I have a huge spreadsheet where I log all these suggestions, so if you commented it before, chances are I just haven't gotten to it yet. Thank you all for understanding, and I hope to see you all in my future videos. If you want to stay up to date on the series, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and if you want to see more, drop a like below. Also check out the previous episodes in the playlist in the description, along with the original iceberg used for the inspiration of the series. Thank you all again, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.